Welcome in. Woof. That's what you tweeted out, Jesse, when you put out your observations from Wisconsin's game down at Iowa. They gave up 42 points, the most Iowa's put on them since 1975. 329 yards rushing allowed, the most since the 2012 Rose Bowl, the game where Wisconsin and Oregon were going back and forth. Wisconsin's offense did not answer the bell like that offense did back then, putting up just 10 points in what was another anemic showing. More turnovers, inability to run the ball. It was just bad all around.
It was an absolutely atrocious performance, and there's no need to sugarcoat anything. Anybody listening and watching knows what happened on Saturday night. This is a matchup that used to be close every year, that for a decade was dominated by Wisconsin. And not only did Wisconsin have no answer, the Badgers were embarrassed. And to be honest, there have now been more performances in 2 years under Luke Fickell that you can say were embarrassments than you can say were good quality wins, because I still don't know whether they have any good quality wins. And obviously Luke's going to get more time, but man, not a whole lot of positives right now.
Not ideal. Not ideal. All right, we'll get to it. We're going to talk we'll talk about it all, what went right, what went wrong, and then get into some listener questions as well. Before we do, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. Best vintage gear you could possibly find in the college game. They have so much new Wisconsin gear, whether it's hats, pullovers, hoodies, so much good stuff here these last couple of months that you can check out, and really good, I think, probably for the Christmas season coming up. So check it out, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right. What went right?
Do you have your stopwatch on?
Someone said they were taking bets on how long this thing was going to be, and I told them to take the under because it is going to be the under. The one positive I came away with, Nathaniel Vakos made a field goal on the first drive.
That is true. And I would add, Wisconsin is exceptionally good at taking 3-0 leads. They have now done that against Alabama, Penn State, and Iowa. So yay for Wisconsin. And a couple more that I can come up with here are at least Wisconsin's 3 false start penalties on the first drive were offset by 3 Iowa penalties to allow Wisconsin to pick up a couple of first downs and move the ball into position to kick a field goal. And certainly there was an actual touchdown drive put together. Braden Locke threw a ball to CJ Williams. Nice catch by CJ on a 4th down for a 14-yard touchdown pass. And that is all that I have to say about what went right.
All right. What went wrong? A lot. Couldn't stop the run, couldn't run the ball, turned the ball over again twice, throwing right to guys, which is exactly what we talked about last week. You said it's a learning opportunity for him. I told you he wasn't learning. He's still not learning, throwing those passes that he did. We'll get to that in a minute, but I think it has to start with the run defense, because Wisconsin's run defense for the last decade plus has been one of the things that you could count on. And you were not able to count on it last year. To an extent, you were this year. They had done a better job, but last night they got exposed time after time after time. And again, I know they weren't fully healthy at inside linebacker. Jaheim Thomas wasn't fully healthy. Christian Allegro had 16 tackles, many of them probably 6 or 7 yards down the line, down the field. Not a whole lot of playing on the other side of the ball. Outside linebackers couldn't contain, couldn't hold up. The defensive line getting pushed back and taken for rides. It was an absolute abject disaster for them defensively in trying to stop the run. Absolutely horrible. Again, as I said in the open, the most yards they've given up in a game, rushing wise, since the 2012 Rose Bowl, when Oregon put all those yards on them. And I think it was the worst in a Big Ten game since Minnesota had 411 yards against them in 2005. And that 2005 game is more remembered for the block punt and Wisconsin winning. But they had 411 yards that day. Last night was the most since then in a Big Ten game. And I know Oregon's part of the Big Ten, but you know what I'm saying.
This is one of the most disheartening performances I have to imagine for Wisconsin because of what this rivalry means, or at least meant, the importance of this game, the way these two programs clash with similar styles. And these guys knew exactly what Iowa was going to do. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know. You've got Caleb Johnson. Obviously, he's a fantastic running back, came into this game ranking second in the country in rushing yards per game at 143. Brendan Sullivan is making his first start at quarterback. You know they're not going to put it on his shoulders, and they ended up throwing it, 10 times? So you know he's a mobile quarterback, and you've got to contain him. They couldn't do anything. It looked like, despite having a week to prepare, they had no concept of how to stop Iowa's rushing attack, and it went beyond Caleb Johnson. Iowa had two other running backs that looked like they could have been Heisman Trophy winners because of the way they were able to find holes. I give Iowa's offensive line a ton of credit. They just flat out dominated, and they got their left guard back, and I'm sure that was important because he had missed a couple games. But when you were watching some of those replays, they were moving dudes off the ball, creating loads of space. And it's funny because you and I were texting during the game, and I was thinking this as it was happening on Iowa's very first drive. It was 3rd and 1. They threw the ball. It was incomplete, and I punted. And I was thinking, what the hell are they doing? And I think they realized that soon thereafter because they just plowed it right down Wisconsin's throat. I look at the drive in the 3rd quarter where that was a 10-play, 80-plus yard touchdown drive. You know how many times they passed? Here's a bagel for you. 0. They didn't have to. It was absolutely embarrassing in every way imaginable. And so for them not to be able to stop or even contain a rushing attack against a team that was only going to run the ball says it all about where Wisconsin's defense is right now.
Yeah, absolutely, utterly pathetic. I mean, that's just the word that you have to use. The run defense was pathetic. And when you look at what they did passing wise, this 3-game winning streak, or even the last 2 years, they've completed 13 passes the last 2 years combined with Deacon Hill and Brendan Sullivan. You know what they're doing. They ran for 200 yards last year, a lot of that on one play, I'll admit that. But 329. Unfathomable when you think about Wisconsin's run defense just a couple years ago. Right? I mean, you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be tough in the trenches. You're supposed to be able to hold up against anybody. That's what Wisconsin football is about. We hear even this coaching staff talks about it. We're going to win in the trenches. And they got their butt kicked in the trenches last night. And they got offensive line wise too. It's not just on the defensive line or the front seven. Offensive line got their ass kicked too. So it was an all-around failure in the trenches last night. Iowa is always a tough team. Wisconsin used to be able to match that toughness. They did not match that toughness last night. They really, to be honest, didn't match it a year ago either on offense, or the year before when they lost 24 to, I think it was 14 or something like that. So it is utterly ridiculous to give up that many yards to a team that is not going to throw the ball. And they know they don't have to throw the ball. And that's even more demoralizing, I think, if you're Wisconsin and a Wisconsin fan.
Yeah. This defense 3 years ago would have taken 5 games for a team to get to 329 yards rushing. There's just not much more to say about that. It's a horrible performance. You have to hope that these guys have some semblance of, I'm not going to say they lack pride, but certainly the execution level is so bad right now that you just wonder what they have in the tank over the next 3 games. And we got plenty of time to talk about that with the bye. But this one, and Luke talked about it after the game, the way this one stings, he could tell. I mean, it burns him up. He hates losing, and he certainly hates losing like this. But he said you could explain away or try to explain away the 42-10 loss against Alabama. Oh, they've got a really great wide receiver. Can't explain this one away. You knew exactly what they were going to do. You're supposed to be able to match that physicality. He said it starts with running the ball and being able to defend the run, and they couldn't do either. So absolutely, they were exposed. It's so demoralizing, I think, because it's hard to see where it gets better in the immediate future. Yeah,
because the schedule's not getting any easier the rest of this year or next year. You know what I mean? Like you have things to figure out. Is it a back to the drawing board type of thing for Luke Fickell? Again, this is stuff that we can talk about a little bit later in the show, because those comments from him, I think, are starting to ring hollow. I feel like we hear the same thing a lot, and we have to do this better, we have to do that better, and they're not doing it better. And that, obviously, you can say it burns him up, and that's fine. He hates to lose. Guess what? Fans hate watching them lose. Mm-hmm. Fans hate having to see their team get pushed up and down the field and all over the place. They don't want to see that anymore. How are you going to fix it? That's the question that needs to be answered. And right now they don't have any of those answers. And he even admitted last night he did not have any answers. He said, I don't know. Like in terms of like the job and like I don't know. Okay. At least you're being honest this time. I mean, at least you're being honest, not this time, but at least you're being honest about it. Like he caught himself a few weeks ago, almost said, I don't know. Last night he went ahead and said it. And I don't want to, maybe I'm parsing words here. Maybe that's not fair, but we hear a lot of the same stuff. So other side of the ball, we can talk. I mean, inability to run the ball. Tawee Walker, after those 3 weeks, these past couple of weeks, has not been able to get going whatsoever. It feels like he is running, I don't want to say more tentatively, like there's just more, and maybe because there's no holes, but it feels like there's just more dancing. It feels like there's more unsureness of exactly what he wants to do. And that is obviously on the offensive line, not opening up holes enough for him to be convicted. But I think that having that feeling that there's something going to be there. And it feels like maybe he's at that point mentally where he's not sure if it's going to actually open up or not. And for the most part, it's not. So that run game has just been tough to watch the last couple of weeks.
This was absolutely not the game to try to put more on Braden Locke's shoulders, and that's what ended up happening. And obviously not being able to effectively run the ball impacts everything. And so I don't know if they just abandoned it because they decided to throw more. You can't throw more than you run the ball in a game like this. And yet they did. And
I mean, it's 29-28, so it's not like, right? I mean, it wasn't like they did it, but the early portion of that game for sure.
Yes, in the first half. But at the same time, they had 48 first half rushing yards, which is the fewest yards rushing they've had in a first half all season. So it's like you're stuck, caught between a rock and a hard place, however you want to put it. You want to say you're physical and establish the run and put it more on your offensive line, and you're getting nothing. So then you got to say, well, can we get something through the air with a quarterback who clearly is struggling and continues to struggle and is showing you that maybe this is his ceiling, especially against good competition. It's an absolute mess. I could talk about the run game. I feel like more people probably want to talk about the pass game or lack thereof. So maybe we can go there next.
We can, but I will say this. Maybe this was unfair to leave out of the positives because we went through it so quickly. Darian Dupree, I think, had his best game in terms of running the ball. He ran it for, 7 carries for 52 yards. He had the same number of yards on 9 fewer carries than Tawee Walker. So maybe this is a little bit of a bounce for him, and maybe he needs to be getting a few more carries here when they play Oregon in a couple of weeks. You're not playing Cade Akamelli, so that's, which is still a little mind-boggling. And I think maybe we know the writing on the wall there, but Darian Dupree, a positive, should have included that in that 1 minute of positives that we talked about. The passing game. I got a stat for you. I know. Look at this. Analytics is better. QBR, all that good stuff. Like it takes into more consideration a whole lot of different things other than just straight up passer rating. Passer rating is, I know it's maybe a little antiquated for some people. Pass efficiency, which I get, but it's also the easiest way to compare stuff from 1993 and 1998 to what is happening now. And I went through all the quarterbacks that have started at least 2 games for Wisconsin since 1993. One of them has a worse passer rating than Braden Locke. He ranks 22nd out of 23 in career passer rating among guys that have started 2 games. Do you know the guy that finished last?
Oh boy,
it's a tough one. It is. I didn't even know that he started 2 games in 1994, and I had no idea. 94.
Who was it?
Jay Macias.
Jay Macias, yes.
Came in he started a couple games for an injured Darrell Bevell in 1994. He was the starting quarterback who got replaced by Darrell Bevell in 1992.
Yes.
So he had stats from back then. He got replaced for a good reason. His career passer rating, I think it was like 106, and Braden Locke's is 112. So Kurt Phillips is ahead of him. Tanner McAvoy is ahead of him. every quarterback that started 2 games other than Jay Macias is ahead of him. And it's in large part due to his yards per attempt, which isn't even the top 100 in the country right now at 6.1. It's better than last year. He was at 5 something last year. But he's just not he's not playing well. And you throw that into, like, it'd be one thing if he just wasn't playing well and he wasn't, you just hand the ball off, wasn't make just check downs here and there. But he's making the huge mistakes again and again and again. Again and again. Maybe I have to say this 8 times because he's thrown 8 picks in his starts this year. But those 2 were not as bad as the one last week against Penn State, but they were close. He just doesn't see guys. He can say he sees them, but he still throws it. That corner made a good play, but he also had eyes to the quarterback and was, he's wide open. Why is he wide open? Because there was some help, and he didn't have to worry about anything behind him, the corner, I'm saying. Didn't have to worry anything about him. And the second one, the linebacker's right there, dude. Right there. And that was a crazy lucky interception, the way that it kicked, but he threw it right to him. I think he was surprised that he got the ball thrown right to him. And if he was able to catch that, he'd probably be playing offense. But there are so many of those. There have been so many of those decisions, and they're just horrible decisions. And Luke Fickell said after the game, they're bad decisions. It's not a physical thing. It's bad decisions. You want to talk about the physical? We can talk about the physical with him. How many passes are you going to get tipped at the line of scrimmage? Right? That's a physical thing. And we can give credit to Iowa if you want to. I'm going to say it has something to do with the fact that he's 6 feet tall. And it's not ideal. And he doesn't have the feel in the pocket to move around and find spaces. So, didn't feel like drops were a problem last night. But that's because the ball was rarely finding their hands.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. Look,
sorry, that's my bad.
You can be an effective quarterback and be 6 feet and under. I remember Russell Wilson's pro day and the questions that he was being asked about, how are you going to do this in the NFL? You're 5'11" or something like that. And he said, well, I don't have to see over my 6'6" lineman. I throw through lanes and angles. And it's like, okay, that works because you're freaking Russell Wilson.
It works because you have a huge arm. You have an NFL arm. Braden Locke does not have an NFL arm.
Right. So there's that aspect of it. Way too many passes batted at the line of scrimmage, which was an issue a year ago. And the interceptions are they're horrible. You can't explain them away. If you have one mistake in a game or one mistake every couple games, okay. If you're going to take shots, you're going to throw a handful of picks, but they come at absolutely horrible times. Obviously, the pick 6 against Penn State that gave the Nittany Lions the lead for good. And then you throw that interception where you're looking for Quincy Burrows, and all of a sudden the corner cuts across, picks it off, and then Iowa ends up scoring a touchdown. They scored a touchdown on the second interception too. And sure, you can argue, oh, well, did he kick the ball on purpose? So that shouldn't have been an interception, but you shouldn't have made the throw because the guy's standing right in front of Tretch Kekahuna while there's another defender there as well. And so, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but their quarterback options right now are not ideal. And I know a lot of people want to see Mabrey Mettauer, and I kind of feel like, not even kind of, give him a shot. But the problem is, and this is a real legit problem. First of all, your next game's against number 1 Oregon. You say every coach would say you never want to put a player in a position to fail. If you start him or play him significant snaps in that game, I think you're putting him in a position to fail. So maybe it's the last couple games, but you've got to find some answers at quarterback. It's Braden Locke. I know you said this last week, not the answer at quarterback for them in the future. At this point, you've started 9 games and you've shown what you're all about. That doesn't mean you can improve year to year, but it's just like, kind of feels like this is who they are. Or who he is. But with Mabrey, he was so far behind the other 2. Maybe he's made up significant ground here in the 2 months since we last saw practice. I just think you got to try something different because you have to find something that has the potential to work.
That's the question that needs to be asked of Luke Fickell is, do you think that, and my guess is he's going to say, no, Braden's the guy. Like I probably would, I'm sure, I'm not sure of anything right now, but I feel like he's going to say Braden's the guy. Phil Longo scheduled to speak after the bye week, so leading into the Oregon game. We'll see what he has to say as well. But I think it's a great point about not wanting to throw a guy into a spot where he's potentially going to fail. But I also think when you have a quarterback that continually turns the ball over, I feel like it's demoralizing to the rest of the team. It's not like these guys are making great plays. He's making stupid throws. So if as soon as that interception happened, it flipped everything once again. I mean, they had Wisconsin had kicked a field goal on their first drive, helped significantly by penalties, including a personal foul, which Luke Fickell mentioned after the game. He goes, I don't know that we score. I don't know if we kick a field goal if without the penalties. And yeah, I would agree. So there's that. But like after the missed field goal, you get the ball in pretty good, territory, and then you go and do that, and it was all downhill from there. Again, I'm not saying that if he didn't throw that ball, if he didn't throw that interception, the game would have been different because Iowa still was going to run it down their throat. But he just makes just killer mistakes, and it happens every game. And as I said last week, I've come to accept it, that it's just going to happen. And I know, which is ridiculous, but I have come to accept it. I know it's coming. Everyone that watches Wisconsin football knows it's coming. It's just how bad is it going to be? And last night it was pretty darn bad. So I don't know what you can do. Like I think that there are certain things that you can get better at as a quarterback. Is vision one of them? Potentially. But I feel like pocket presence, the feel around you, and not getting flustered and not reacting poorly is pretty important for a quarterback. And I don't think that he does a very good job of it.
Certainly hasn't this season. The proof is in the pudding, and it's not even close to good enough. And I think you're right about it being demoralizing when you almost come to expect it. And you're fighting an uphill battle even when those things don't happen, because Wisconsin is just not at a point now where they can blow people off the ball against good teams. And I think that's important because Wisconsin wants to be a good team. You hired Luke Fickell to bring this program to a different level. You didn't hire him to go on a 3-game winning streak against teams that are now combined, I think, 3-13 in Big Ten games. All those teams stink. You brought him here so you could win back these kinds of games and go to the next level. And I don't even, that almost feels like impossible right now. But the quarterback spot, I don't know what the answer is this season. You're just kind of stuck, and you can give a true freshman a shot. And I think they should. They're going to have to do a lot of, we're not there yet, but this offseason is the most important of Luke Fickell's time here. And that's more important than even the first offseason, because there's no grace period anymore. People are sick of what they're seeing. I know Wisconsin wasn't good before he got hired, which is why they made the change, but you got hired for a reason, and it wasn't to do this.
Where do you think this loss ranks in terms of embarrassments for Wisconsin football in say your time covering the team?
Well, that's a good question that would require some thought. There are 4 under the Fickell era so far that I look at and go, my God. Obviously, the Indiana loss, and you could say, oh, look at Indiana now, they're 9-0. Different coach, different team. The team last year sucked. They were 2-21 in Big Ten games going into that. There's that one. There's the Northwestern loss where Wisconsin was trailing by 3 touchdowns at the half at home and got booed off the field by their home fans. There's the 42-10 loss against Alabama. I would put the Alabama one lowest on the rung among them, because at least Alabama was a top 5 team with a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback and the best wide receiver in the country, or one of them. And this one too. The Iowa one of those 4, I almost think is the worst, because they got their ass kicked by a team in a game that actually matters to people. And again, you can give some grace for year one. Oh, they lost to Indiana and Northwestern. They're trying to figure it out. There's no excuse for this one, especially because you knew exactly what Iowa was going to do. So I think this is the worst loss of the Luke Fickell tenure. I'll start there, and then working backwards. Certainly the 2022 game against Illinois, where they just, I don't say this very often, almost never say it, but they flat out quit in the second half. They just did. There's the whole, halftime draw line in the sand speech that Paul Chryst gave the players, and they quit and they got blown out. And Paul Chryst was fired the next day. I think I'd have to put that number 1. And the thing about, again, I started covering this team in 2011. Wisconsin look, they've lost a lot of games over that time. They also won a lot of games. But you know what they were able to do in many of those losses? Be competitive, keep it within single digits. Maybe they'd lose by 10 points or something like that. And I don't have all the records in front of me. You probably do. I'm obviously answering this question on the fly, but I can't think of, other than 2014 Big Ten championship against Ohio State, losing 59-0. There are very few games during this 14-year stretch where I can say Wisconsin was embarrassed. They may have lost, but they weren't embarrassed. And that word is stacking up way too much.
Wisconsin BYU in 2018? In the mix or no? Because it's BYU and it's a non-conference game?
I think that one's been lost to history in a way that some of these others haven't.
When it was 24-21, it wasn't like it was a blowout, but they ran the ball all over them. And just could not, like, jet sweep after jet sweep after jet sweep. It was like Wisconsin and Nebraska in the Big Ten championship game. They knew exactly what was coming. Wisconsin couldn't stop it. So I think that was a little bit tough to see, especially because the team in that moment was a top 10 team in the country. And obviously that's not how it played out. But there are some games, Minnesota at the end of 2018, I would put up there where the winning streak was snapped. I think that was an embarrassment of a game. 2021 at Minnesota, chance to go to the Big Ten championship game, and you don't show up. There are embarrassing games, but they were competitive in some of those games. They were like embarrassing losses. Weren't competitive last night. I don't know that they quit. Like, I don't know that I saw them quit, but I certainly did not see them come out and play with a ton of fire either. And it was just kind of like going about, I don't know. I would say going about their business, but that would indicate that they actually took care of business, and they didn't, certainly. But I said last week when we were thinking about this Iowa game, I thought it had blowout potential because of what happened last week against Penn State. I thought, how do you overcome that mentally when you were up 10-7 on the number 3 team in the country with 6 minutes left in the third quarter and you end up losing by 15? How do you bounce back from that? Even though it is a rivalry game, how do you bounce back from it? And then the night game, and it just felt like potential. But then you're like, Iowa, really? Are they really going to be able to put up a ton of points in Wisconsin? Guess what? They can. And it's not like they did it in a flashy way. They just slammed that ball right down Wisconsin's throat, play after play after play after play.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because the list of bad losses in dating to the 2010s or whatever, it's not a very long list, and it gives you, to me, an even further appreciation of what Wisconsin has been. That, okay, they were going to lose some games and they'd be heartbreakers. Arizona State, where Joel Stave was taking a knee and they didn't give it to him, but like those kinds of games are a hell of a lot different from what we're seeing now. They're not even competitive. And it shows how far away they are from being a legitimate Big Ten competitor when this is happening against a team that came in 5-3. And sure, 2 of those losses were to really good teams. They also went to Michigan State and lost. It's not like they're unbeaten college football playoff team. Like, you're not even competitive in a matchup like this. Where do we go from here? There just are not very many positive vibes.
Another one popped into my mind, 2003 versus UNLV. They lost 24-5.
Okay, that one at least predates my time here.
Excuse me, 23-5. The Indiana game in 2001, where they gave up 62 to Indiana. Indiana ran for like 400 and some odd yards. It was like 31. It was like 31-0 after the first quarter or something like that. That was embarrassing. I know I'm past where you covered it. I was just thinking through my memory bank of just embarrassing performances from a Wisconsin team. Yeah, we don't need to go too much further into it. We have about 1 million questions to answer here with from Twitter. Do you have anything else that you wanted to talk about? What went wrong before we jump into it? Oh, penalties, ridiculous. Those were the two of the least penalized teams in the country, and that one drive had like 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was ridiculous. What a horrible way to start a game.
Yeah, that
But
that first drive told you all you needed to know about how ready or not ready Wisconsin was. Tucker Ashcraft had 2 false start penalties, ended up with a third later. I think Joe Huber was called for one as well. 3 false start penalties on the first drive. Did you not know what to expect going into Kinnick? I knew it was going to be crazy, but you got to be ready for that.
and I agree. The fact that they were getting called for delay a game with some of the stuff that they were doing, kind of, I don't know if it negates the false starts. I don't think it does. But maybe makes you understand it a little bit better as to why they were happening, and they finally started calling them because I think Fickle, I assume Luke, he was telling them like they're, and you go back and look at it, the guys were clapping, like they're like, and you could be like, oh, we're just trying to get our guys' attention at the line to move over, but no. So that is, yeah, disconcerting signals or what? No, what is it? Something like that. I know it was a delay game, but just the messing with the signals is definitely something we've seen before. I'm trying to think what team it was here. Might have been Iowa last year. Those guys. Kirk Ferentz. That's a new Kirk Ferentz. That is a new Kirk Ferentz. I don't think Kirk Ferentz of a couple years ago scores that last touchdown. Now, again, Wisconsin knew what was coming. They're playing. You have to stop them. I have zero problem with them running the ball, but I do think that Kirk Ferentz of a few years ago does not run it. I think he takes a knee because they get the first down. There's like a minute 30 left, minute 40 left. Take a couple of knees and the game's over. So I wonder what exactly. I don't know that it was a Fickle thing. I'm guessing it's not a Fickle thing. My guess is probably more of a Wisconsin thing, and him shoving it down Wisconsin's throat for changing and going away from who they were as a team. I don't know. It's a weird. It was a weird thing for him to do. You don't expect that out of him. Again, zero problem with it, but it's interesting. Interesting. All right, let's jump into some of these listener questions, and we'll start with this one from our guy Ryan. Will Wisconsin have 2 new coordinators next year?
I think they'll have at least one. I think you know me. I'm pretty hesitant to say things like that because I don't want to make a rush to judgment. But this isn't working offensively, and I understand that they've been handcuffed by the fact they've got a backup quarterback. But Phil Longo also picked that backup quarterback and felt really good about him coming into the season. It's just, I don't know, man. You've seen what happened against good teams. They're outclassed, they're outmatched, and they don't seem to be able to put a plan together that can put these guys in a position to win. So I don't think Luke is going to stand by and let this continue because it sure isn't getting any easier next year. Their schedule next year, and I put this in my takeaways, like, yeah, we knew the schedule was going to be hard. That's not an excuse. It's harder next year. Indiana's all of a sudden really good. That's a road game. Michigan's on the road. Oregon's on the road. Minnesota's on the road. Oh, I think they have a team called Alabama on the road. And you still have home games against Iowa, which has kicked your ass now for 3 straight games and won the Heartland Trophy 3 in a row for the first time since the mid-2000s. And another home game against Ohio State. I think Luke is going to be proactive this offseason. Now, I don't exactly know what that means, but I just think in 2 years, we've not seen the results that people need to be able to see to have confidence in the future.
So I definitely think Phil Longo is going to be gone. That's just my opinion, not based on anything fact related other than just a feel. Mike Tressel is the one that's a little bit uncertain because he's good friends with Luke Fickell, and he's been with Luke Fickell for a while, right? And they have a lot of shared history. So I don't know how exactly that goes. Personally, I mean, I guess we'll see how these next 3 games go. I think certainly you can't erase or overlook or forget what happened last night as a defensive coordinator. Like you can't. And again, he has the talent that he has, but you can't forget that. And so I'm sure Luke put a lot of it on himself too. He's a defensive guy and he knows how difficult it is, but it's not exactly the same situation, but in 2004, Wisconsin's offense was horrible. And Wisconsin's offense was horrible, so they brought in Paul Chryst as a co offensive coordinator with Brian White, because Brian White had some history there with Barry, instead of just straight out firing him. And he ends up being, the play caller. Same thing in 2006, where he had Dave Doran and Hankowitz as like co-DCs, and it's really Doran that was calling the play. So like there's some history here with it, but we'll see how it plays out. Another one for you here, Jesse. When do we start having conversations about Fickell simply not being a good fit here?
I think you can have that conversation now based strictly on results. I also think it's not going to change the fact that he's going to get more than 2 years. They're paying him a lot of money. I go back to the conversation that I had with some of those guys a few weeks ago, Joe Thomas, Joe Schobert, guys who have been a part of the program. And I said, well, what's a reasonable time frame here? And everybody to a man said 4 years, because you deserve the opportunity, or you should have the opportunity to recruit a class, get them to be upperclassmen, try to turn the program around. I still think that's at least what's going to happen. In 2026, maybe they have to hope their schedule is a little bit more manageable. But I've seen comparisons to Rich Rodriguez at Michigan and how badly things went there before they had to make a change. I just think, he's probably only halfway through his tenure. And I think you may not be happy with it, but you should at least accept that he's here to stay. I don't think the assistants will be, because he needs to make changes necessary to move the program forward. And yeah, they're going to go to the portal, but they're not going to get rid of 80 kids and go get 80 new kids. It's easier to make a change with staffers and see if they can implement something different.
Ben says, which group do you think has been more underwhelming this season, the defensive line or the linebacker unit?
Linebacker as an outside and inside put together,
yeah.
I assume. I would say the linebackers. I mean, it's a matter of expectations too. Like I thought that the defensive line would probably be the weak link. And for a stretch, they were excellent. Even like look at that first drive. Kurt Neal broke through and disrupted a pass. I think they've done some really good things, but it's coming from a place where I don't think the expectations were astronomically high. So maybe it's unfair. I don't know. I'd put it more on the linebackers, and it's also in part due to what we have come to expect over the years, where you saw dominance there. And Christian Allegro had a really good game. No question about it. Got more opportunities because Jaheim Thomas wasn't in there. But I don't know that we've seen enough from the group as a whole, inside and outside, where you say like they're kind of taking over the game in a way that we're used to seeing in previous years.
Yeah. Jeff says, was some of what we're seeing inevitable? A program that's avoided significant downturn or down stretches for 20 plus years seems overdue for some bad luck developmentally. Changing landscape, poorly navigated, and multiple years of QB injury seems to have done it. He says, yes, this is me coping.
No, I don't think so. I don't think you can say this was an inevitability, even though most programs have gone through ebbs and flows, even good programs. Mentioned Michigan before. Ohio State, obviously, in 2011 wasn't particularly good. Now, obviously, they're real good now, but that doesn't mean that it had to happen to Wisconsin, because it almost seemed like they were built to weather that. But of course, when you make this kind of transition and you're entering a new era of college football, it puts Wisconsin up against it. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the way the landscape is now drastically impacts Wisconsin in a negative way relative to what it used to be. And what I mean by that is, for decades, it was a recruit and develop program. And you say you want to do that now, but also there's a transfer portal. Like, it's harder to keep guys, and then you want to go get these transfers. And a lot of other schools are getting the really good transfers too. So like, they're in a really difficult spot. On the other hand, so are a lot of other teams. But I don't want to say that it was inevitable that this was going to happen to Wisconsin.
Pete says one of the big things Fickell emphasized in his first season as coaching was finishing. Badgers have now been outscored 98-17 in the second half of their losses this season. Why can't they be good in the second half? Why are they struggling in the second half?
They're not a good team. I mean, I don't have some deep.
See, but that's the thing. Like, they're getting outscored in the second half of games, their losses. They outscored, obviously, USC in the first half, and they outscored Penn State in the first half.
Mhm.
So it's not like they were playing horrible football in the first half of games. Why is it all of a sudden the inability to put it together in the second half? Are there not changes are there adjustments? And I put adjustments in air quotes. I feel like adjustments are happening more on the sideline, just like they are in the NFL, more especially with the video that you're able to see now.
Mhm.
What do you think?
The simple answer to me is good teams know how to close games. And I know players said I think Hunter Wohler even talked about this. He doesn't buy into the idea of needing to learn how to win. I don't know whether that's true or not for a team, but when good teams are up against it, they have a mentality to go out and execute. And I go back to like Penn State going into that game against Wisconsin had outscored teams 59-3 in the third quarter. Well, why did they do that? Obviously they're mentally tough, and certainly they didn't win against Ohio State. I just think good teams know how to play a full 4-quarter game, or if you don't play well early, you have the ability to execute. I mean, think about even, I don't know, the Alabama game. They can just turn it on. The really talented teams can flip a switch, and you don't want to be in that spot, but you just go let your playmakers make a play. And that's not what Wisconsin is. But they also don't seem to have like the toughness or consistency to be able to gut out a win where it's not pretty, and it's not going to be pretty all the way through. When is the last time you can say they had a legitimately good quality win? I know they beat Nebraska and Minnesota to close last season. They were 5-5. I guess that's the standard that Wisconsin is at now, where that's considered a good win. It's been such a long time since they've done anything of note. And so it just speaks to where they are as a program. They're just not good enough to get any of these games done.
An overrated Iowa in 2001, I'd probably say, is the last good win.
Oh, 2021?
What did I say? 2001?
Yeah,
2021
in the country. Yeah, I mean, that's the last ranked team they've beaten. It's been 3+ years.
Did they beat Purdue? Was that the Purdue game before or after that?
Purdue was, I believe, right before, when Purdue was 25th.
Okay. Chris says, is there an NFL caliber player on this roster right now? There certainly doesn't seem to be one in the 22 starters.
I think some of the offensive linemen will end up in the NFL. I do. But beyond that, I mean, Hunter Wohler is a good player. And I think he'll be in the NFL. I think there are a handful of guys, but there's not a truckload like the really good Wisconsin teams had. And obviously you see the difference.
John says, after getting out physical like that, do we need to change, or I should say, do we need to ask questions about the strength and conditioning program?
No. I mean, it's hard to say because we're not there, but like, I don't think they're working any less hard or training in a manner that's not preparing them. And I mean, I think you and I have both been to Squat Fest and everything that comes with it. I mean, the dudes work their ass off, but it's one thing to work hard, and it's another thing to be talented enough to execute at a high level consistently. So I'm not going to put it on that. Yeah, I'm just not.
Brandon asks, did Fickell make the wrong hire with Longo, or is this more of a personnel deficiency?
Well, we have 20 games to go on at this point? 21 games.
Yeah.
It feels like both. It just does. I think we've been trying to read between the lines for quite a while about, well, what is Luke saying and what is Phil saying? And doesn't seem like these quite line up. You know, you say you want to run the ball and be real physical, and I know Phil runs the ball. I mean, he made that clear from the first day he was hired and spoke to us. But they're not doing either thing particularly well. And they do have some good wide receivers. I think we've talked about that. But overall, it just doesn't feel like there are enough difference makers. And let's just be real about it. The quarterback situation is where it starts. If they really truly had a dynamic quarterback, and this isn't fair, but let's say they had $3 million and they gave it to Cam Ward and he decided to come here, I think we'd be having some different conversations, because a truly great quarterback can elevate everyone around him. And we just We haven't seen that. So, like, I think it's everything rolled into one. Having somebody like that can make you look a heck of a lot better, and they don't have that. On the other hand, they didn't have that for years and years, and we're still a very solid team because of the foundation they had in place with a really strong defense and a good running game.
Yeah, I mean, Cam Ward can't play defensive tackle and stop the run.
No.
Right? Like, so we could talk about getting a quarterback in here, but they've given up 42 to Alabama, 38 to USC, 42 to Iowa. Like, it's not just a quarterback thing. Now, that said, I think a quarterback can lift other parts of a team too, with the belief we have this guy and we are going to, they're going to score points and we feel good about that. And we can go out there and play and just roll. And we have confidence in it that it's going to be great. You know what I mean? Like Russell Wilson, Scott Tolzien, Jack Cohn, like people felt good. Joel Stabby, that people felt good to get, around those guys and the way that they led an offense and led a team. I think the skill positions are good enough to win in the Big Ten right now. I do. And I think the offensive line, certainly not last night, but a lot of Wisconsin offensive lines have struggled to run the ball against Iowa. So I don't know that is a huge I don't think last night's a huge indicator that of what is what on the offensive line. That said, all of it's irrelevant because the quarterback is not good enough. He's not it. He's never going to be it. And he's a backup quarterback, average at best. So that is kind of where they sit right now. And you're right. They've been able to overcome it in previous years and previous iterations of the, under different coaches because they had something to fall back on. And they have, it's tough to see what they have to fall back on, which leads me to this question. Peter says, we're 21 games in the regime. Where on the field has any progress been made? He wants to so badly be patient and trust, but at some point you got to show something.
You can go positionally and say there's a couple that are better. The offensive line, obviously, Saturday night notwithstanding, I think has been better. The hiring of AJ Blasek feels like it was a really smart move. But I don't really think any of that mattered. I could say, the defensive line, like I was talking about earlier, they've exceeded the expectations largely because expectations were so low. All that matters is the end result, and it's not better at all. They are going to find themselves, barring a miracle, in the exact same position they were a year ago. 5-5 going into the last two regular season games against Nebraska and Minnesota, needing to win one to guarantee you're going to a bowl. That does not feel like progress. And so I can't say there's market progress anywhere. And that, I think, certainly for the fan base, is what's so frustrating. You want to see at least incremental progress. And again, doing it against three bad teams is not that progress. When can you do it against a quality opponent? They haven't done it.
I don't think, going back to firing coaches, I don't expect them to do that in the season, right? Because we heard what Fickell said about Graham Harrell being fired from Purdue in the middle of the year. And it's not necessarily something that you want to do. Now, again, he has said things before, but is there anybody on this coaching staff that could call plays instead of him?
See, that's where I'm at. Is I don't think anybody else would be in position to do it. I mean, it's his show. He's signaling everything in there. That doesn't mean there aren't other guys who might understand it or some of it, but like that would be a significant problem. I would not expect that either, though. There's still 3 regular season games left. You're about to play the number 1 team in the country. Like, maybe you can find something here at the end of the regular season to build on. It's just that I don't think anybody has much confidence in that happening right
now. Some other ones here. A lot of it is just fire people. That's a lot of it. But Longo has said that Locke is a really intelligent guy and that he has a full understanding of the offense. Is the offense really that simplistic, or is Phil Parker a super genius?
Phil Parker is a damn good defensive coordinator. Iowa's defense is always good. Like we said, coming into the game, even if they weren't at an elite level, they were still really good. I think they were like second in the Big Ten in takeaways. They had 10 interceptions. They have Jay Higgins, who's one of the best linebackers, not only in the Big Ten, but probably the country. On the other hand, it's one thing to be intelligent when you're studying the playbook and looking at defenses in practice. And it's another thing when the bullets are flying to be able to execute at an extremely high level. And we consistently see that Braden struggles to do that, especially against good teams. So it's a mixture of both. Iowa's defense does deserve credit. They are very good. And Braden Locke has not been anywhere close to good enough, especially in big games since he's been a starter.
Bo asks, how does this coaching staff / university ask for NIL contributions when the product is in a steady decline? It's bad enough to get beat, but this team beats itself.
I think that's a completely fair question to ask because
they keep asking for money.
Yes.
And again, I understand that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's such a strange time in college athletics because it is professional athletics, just in, if you want to call it, their universities and colleges that people attend, even though they're getting paid sometimes more than the assistant coaches themselves. But you're asking fans to spend their hard-earned money on a product, and I think you need to give them a reason as to why it's worth their time. And right now, it's hard to see that path forward. So sometimes it comes down to the wealthiest of donors being willing to give a whole lot of money as opposed to kind of boots on the ground. Can everybody donate a certain amount? Because I don't know why you would want to. Obviously, people want to see their team win, but it's kind of, I ask myself, like, at what cost? You want to see a good product. And I think of Tennessee at the time when they were playing really good football, announcing that they were going to be raising prices on things and it was going to go toward NIL. And it was like, okay, well, now's the time to strike because they're playing really good football. Wisconsin hasn't played really good football in a long time.
They have not. Badger Beatdown says, why does Fickell talk about accountability, but then Ashcraft has 3 false starts and no change?
It's got to come down to whoever is behind him they don't think can get the job done. We've seen a lot of Riley Nowakowski and Tucker Ashcraft, and beyond that, I think JT Seagreaves has been battling an injury. So I think you would have seen him. I don't think there's anybody else. Jackson McGowan, for as much conversation as there was in the offseason about the kind of tight end he could be, more of a pass catcher. I mean, how much have we seen him? And then you've got 2 true freshmen. So I think when you're in that kind of spot and someone's repeatedly making mistakes and staying in, it's because the staff doesn't believe there's anybody else who's even close to getting the job done. And it felt like that's the spot they were in at tight end.
I whenever someone talks about this, I always think about practices, and I don't even know if they do it. I think they have started doing it again, but under Paul Chryst, if you jumped offense, defense in practice, you were getting pulled out and someone else is going in. I think they make them run laps at the end of practice for however many penalties they have. The offensive line I'm talking about, not the entire offense, but the offensive line. I think that was a new addition in the spring. I think that might have been a Blazek thing. So I think that they are trying to hold some guys accountable. Within games, it's a little bit more difficult because you have guys that you practice all week with and you need them to be in there, which, that's tough. That's tough to do. There are just a ton of more questions here. I will get into all of them when we do our show on Tuesday. We'll jump into a whole bunch of overreaction or no. And I think we may just do a full show of overreaction or no, unless something bigger happens here in the next couple of days. Again, I don't believe it will, but you just never know after a 42-10 loss to that offense. Woof. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Can.